Chapter 10 Externalities. In this chapter, we're going to look for the answers to these questions. What is an externality? Why do externalities make market outcomes inefficient? What public policies aim to solve the problem of externalities? How can people sometimes solve the problem of externalities on their own? Why do such private solutions not always work? Remember, markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. In absence of market failures, the competitive market outcome is efficient and maximizes total surplus. However, an externality is one type of market failure, the uncompensated impact of one person's actions on the well-being of a bystander. A negative externality is when the impact on the bystander is adverse. A positive externality is when the impact on the bystander is beneficial. Self-interested buyers and sellers neglect the external costs or benefits of their actions, so the market outcome is not efficient. Government action can sometimes improve upon market outcomes. When markets sometimes fail to allocate resources efficiently, and how government policies can potentially improve the market's allocation, and what kind of policies are likely to work best. Declining to be vaccinated against contagious diseases such as measles imposes costs on other people, which is a negative externality. 100% of economists agree. Examples of negative externalities include air pollution from a factory, a neighbor's barking dog, late night stereo blasting from the dorm room next to yours, noise pollution from construction projects, health risks to others from secondhand smoke, and talking on cell phones while driving, which makes the roads less safe for others. Let's look at a recap of welfare economics. The demand curve shows the private value, the value to buyers, which is the price they are willing to pay. The supply curve shows private costs, the costs directly incurred by sellers. The market equilibrium maximizes consumer and producer surplus at 25 gallons at $2.50. Now, let's look at the external cost, the value of the negative impact on bystanders, which equals $1 per gallon, which is the value of harm from smog, greenhouse gases. The social cost then is the private plus the external cost. The socially optimal quantity is 20 gallons. At any quantity less than 20, the value of additional gas exceeds social cost. At any quantity greater than 20, social cost of the last gallon is greater than its value to society. The market equilibrium is at Q equals 25 is greater than the social optimum of Q equals 20. One solution, tax sellers $1 a gallon, which would shift the supply curve up by $1. Externalities. Internalizing the externality is alternating incentives so that people take into account the external effects of their actions. In our example, the $1 per gallon tax on sellers makes sellers' costs equal to social costs. If market participants pay social costs, the market equilibrium is a social optimum. Examples of positive externalities. Being vaccinated against contagious diseases protects not only you, but the people who visit the salad bar or the produce section after you. The research and development creates knowledge that others can use. People going to college raises the population's education level, which reduces crime and improves government. With a positive externality, the social value of a good includes the private value, or the direct value to buyers, and the external benefit, the value of the positive impact on bystanders. The socially optimal Q maximizes welfare. At any lower Q, the social value of additional units exceeds their costs. At any higher Q, The cost of the last unit exceeds its social value. Let's look at the analysis of a positive externality. In this example, it's the market for flu shots. The external benefit equals $10 a shot. First, draw the social value curve, then find the socially optimal Q, and then tell me what policy would internalize this externality before moving on to the next slide. The social value equals the private value plus the $10 external benefit. So socially optimal Q equals 25 shots. To internalize the externality, use the subsidy of $10 a shot. If there's a negative externality, the market quantity is larger than socially desirable. If there's a positive externality, the market quantity is smaller than socially desirable. To remedy the problem, internalize the externality. You can tax goods with negative externalities and subsidize goods with positive externalities. So let's look at this example again of vaccines. Considering the cost of restricting free choice and the share of people in the U.S. who choose not to vaccinate their children for measles, the social benefit of mandating measles vaccines for all Americans, except those with compelling medical reasons, would exceed the social cost. 89% of economists agree. So what are some public policies towards externalities? There's the command and control policies, which regulate behavior directly. It includes limits on quantity of pollutions emitted and requirements that firms adopt a particular technology to reduce emissions. There's also market-based policies. These are incentives so that the private decision makers will choose to solve the problem on their own. These include corrective taxes and subsidies and tradable solution permits. Corrective taxes and subsidies. Corrective taxes are known as the Pigovian taxes. This induced private decision makers to take into account of the social costs that arise from negative externality. It places a price on the right to pollute. It reduces pollution at a lower cost to society. It raises revenue for the government and enhances economic efficiency. Pigouvian taxes are named after Arthur Pigou, who lived from 1877 to 1959. In this, he states the ideal corrective tax equals the external cost. For activities with positive externalities, the ideal corrective subsidy equals the external benefit. Basically, the idea is to align private incentives with society's interests. Corrective taxes versus regulations. Different firms have different costs of pollution abatement. The efficient outcome is where firms with the lowest abatement costs reduce pollution the most. Abatement means to cut pollution. A pollution tax is efficient when firms with low abatement costs will reduce pollution to reduce their tax burden. Firms with high abatement costs have greater willingness to pay taxes. The regulation requiring all firms to reduce pollution by a specific amount is not efficient. If all firms must reduce emissions by a fixed amount or a fixed percentage, then abatement is not concentrated among firms with the lowest abatement costs, and so the total cost of abatement is higher. Corrective taxes are better for the environment. The corrective tax gives firms incentive to continue reducing pollution as long as the cost of doing so is less than the tax. If a cleaner technology becomes available, the tax gives firms an incentive to adopt it. In contrast, firms have no incentive for further reduction beyond the level specified in a regulation. Let's look at an example of a corrective tax, the gas tax. The gas tax targets three negative externalities. Congestion, the more you drive, the more you contribute to congestion. Accidents, larger vehicles cause more damage in an accident. And pollution, burning fossil fuels produces greenhouse gases. The Brookings Institute recently described a U.S. carbon tax of $20 per ton, increasing at 4% per year, which would raise an estimated $150 billion per year in federal revenues over the next decade. Given the negative externalities created by carbon dioxide emissions, a federal carbon tax at this rate would involve fewer harmful net distortions to the U.S. economy than a tax increase that generated the same revenue by raising marginal tax rates on labor income across the board. 98% of economists agree. Carbon taxes. A tax on the carbon content of fuels would be a less expensive way to reduce carbon dioxide emissions than would a collection of policies such as corporate average fuel economy requirements for automobiles. 95% of economists agree. Let's look at an example of reducing pollution. Acme and US Electric run coal-burning power plants. Each emits 40 tons of sulfur dioxide per month, so the total emissions equals 80 tons a month. The goal is to reduce sulfur dioxide emissions 25% to 60 tons a month. The cost of reducing emissions is $100 a ton for Acme and $200 a ton for US Electric. There's two policy options. First one, regulation. Each firm must cut its emissions 25%, 10 tons. Compute the cost to each firm and total cost of achieving the goal using this policy. Take a minute and compute this before moving on to the next slide. Each firm must reduce emissions by 10 tons. The cost of reducing emissions is $100 a ton for Acme and $200 a ton for US Electric. So the cost to Acme of 10 tons times $100 a ton is $1,000. The cost to US Electric is 10 tons times $200 a ton is $2,000. The total cost is $3,000. The second policy is issuing 60 permits, each allowing 1 ton sulfur dioxide emission. And give 30 permits to each firm, and then establish a market for trading permits. Each firm may use all its permits to emit 30 tons, may emit less than 30 tons and sell leftover permits, or may purchase extra permits to emit more than 30 tons. Compute the cost of achieving the goal if Acme uses 20 permits and sells 10 to US Electric for $150 each. Take a minute and calculate that before moving on to the next slide. The goal is to reduce emissions from 80 to 60 tons. The cost of reducing emissions is $100 a ton for Acme, $200 a ton for US Electric. So Acme can sell 10 permits to US Electric for $150 each and get $1,500. It can use 20 permits and emit 20 tons of sulfur dioxide. It spends $2,000 to reduce emissions by 20 tons. The net cost to Acme is $2,000 minus $1,500, $500. For US Electric, it can buy 10 permits from Acme and spend $1,500. It can use those 10 plus the original 30 permits and emit 40 tons. It spends nothing on abatement. The net cost to US Electric is $1,500. The total cost of achieving the goal is $500 plus $1,500 is $2,000. So you can see, using tradable permits, the goal is achieved at a lower total cost and lower cost to each firm than using regulation. The tradable pollution permit system reduces pollution at a lower cost than regulation. The firms with a low cost of reducing pollution will do so and sell their unused permits. The firms with high cost of reducing pollution will buy permits. The result, pollution reduction is concentrated among those firms with lowest costs. Reducing pollution using pollution permits or corrective taxes means firms pay for their pollution. Corrective taxes is paid to the government. Pollution permits is paid to buy permits, internalizing the externality of pollution. There are some objections to the economic analysis of pollution. Late Senator Edmund Muskie said, "We cannot give anyone the option of polluting for a fee. People face trade-offs. Eliminating all pollution is impossible. Clean water and clean air is the opportunity cost of a lower standard of living." The clean environment is a normal good. Positive income inelasticity, meaning rich countries can afford a cleaner environment with more rigorous environmental protection. Clean air and clean water follow the law of demand. The lower the price of an environmental protection, the more the public will want. There's some types of private solutions. There's the moral codes and social sanctions. There's charities. There's the self-interest of the relevant parties, which means integrating different types of businesses. And interested parties can enter into a contract. The Coase theorem states if private parties can bargain without cost over the allocation of resources, they can then solve the problem of externalities on their own. Whatever the initial distribution of rights, interested parties can reach a bargain. Everyone is better off, outcome is efficient. Consider, Dick has the legal right to keep a barking dog, Spot. Dick gets a $500 benefit from the dog. Jane bears an $800 cost from the barking. Efficient outcome, Jane can offer Dick $600 to get rid of the dog. Dick will gladly accept. Bye, Spot, and both are better off. In this situation, the negative externality is the Spot's barking, which disturbs Dick's neighbor, Jane. The socially efficient outcome maximizes Dick and Jane's well-being. If Dick valued having Spot more than Jane values peace and quiet, the dog would stay. The Coase theorem states the market will reach an efficient outcome on its own. Now, in the same example, Dick has the legal right to keep a barking dog, Spot. Dick gets an $1,000 benefit from the dog. Jane bears an $800 cost from the barking. The efficient outcome, Dick will turn out any offer below $1,000. Jane will not offer any amount above $800. Therefore, Dick will keep the dog. What if Jane can legally compel Dick to get rid of the dog, Spot? Dick can get an $800 benefit from the dog. Jane will bear a $500 cost from the barking. The efficient outcome, Dick keeps Spot. The private outcome, Dick pays Jane $600 to put up with Spot's barking. The private market achieves the efficient outcome regardless of the initial distribution of rights. Now, let's look at applying the Coase theorem. Collectively, the 1,000 residents of Green Valley value swimming in Blue Lake at $100,000. A nearby factory pollutes the lake water and would have to pay $50,000 for non-polluting equipment. A. Describe a Coase-like private solution. B. Can you think of any reasons why this solution might not work in the real world? In the previous example, a good Coasean solution would be for each of the 1,000 residents to chip in $75 so the town can offer $75,000 to the factory to stop polluting. But think of a few reasons why it might be difficult to implement the Coase theorem in real life. Private solutions do not always work. There's high transaction costs, costs that parties incur in the process of agreeing to and following through on a bargain, stubbornness, bargaining simply breaks down, coordination problems, large number of interested parties, and coordinating everyone is costly. When a transaction between a buyer and seller directly affects a third party, the effect is called an externality. If an activity yields negative externalities, such as pollution, the socially optimal quantity in a market is less than the equilibrium quantity. If an activity yields positive externalities, such as technology spillovers, the socially optimal quantity is greater than the equilibrium quantity. Governments pursue various policies to remedy the inefficiencies caused by externalities. This includes regulating behavior, internalizing an externality using corrective taxes, and issuing permits, similar results to imposing corrective taxes on polluters. According to the Coase theorem, if people can bargain without cost, then they can always reach an agreement in which resources are allocated efficiently. In many cases, however, reaching a bargain among the many interested parties is difficult, so the Coase theorem does not apply. This concludes Chapter 10.